The bottle in Donald's hand sweats. The room doesn't. Crystal burns cold overhead. He's almost past the table when the old man's fork slips and the cane rises, sighting down the length of the room at the compass on Donald's chest. "Where did you get that?" Every conversation dies at once. Secrets are oxygen. Someone just opened a vault. Donald Crumb threads the currents with a bottle of Bordeaux balanced in his hand and a "yes, sir" on his tongue. Black vest, white shirt, bow tie. Background by design, except for the oversized gold compass resting against his chest. It swings when he walks. It catches light, like it remembers fire. He stops at a table where an elderly man sits alone. Tuxedo immaculate, cane capped with carved wood. Steve Leroy barely looks up, until he does. His gaze drops to the pendant. The fork doesn't clatter. It simply slips, a quiet surrender. His face empties. His free hand rises, not quite steady, and the tip of his cane points, accusing, pleading, at Donald's chain. "Where did you get that?" Sound compresses. Laughter thins to a wire. Servers stall mid-stride. Donald's fingers brush the compass, an old habit, a reflex older than memory. "It was my father's," he says, though his voice wavers on the word father. Or, what I was told belonged to him. Steve's mouth trembles. "There is only one," he whispers. "I had it made for my son." Before we continue, click subscribe, like this video, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more captivating stories, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. The room tilts, crystal, gold, and gravity, all leaning toward a single coil of chain. A waiter and a millionaire, tethered by a piece of metal that refuses to be ordinary. Objects don't breathe, but this one seems to pull air from the room. What story hides in the compass that won't sit still? What map does it carry that can bend two lives toward collision? Later, in a side lounge, Steve's thumb finds the engraving with a certainty that scares him. "Find your way home." The letters are his, the metalwork is his. The past is not. Across town, earlier that afternoon, Donald's keys scraped the same old lock. The apartment smelled like lemon cleaner and late homework. Inside a shoebox, a burned Polaroid, a woman's laugh captured mid-smile, a young man with the right half of his face ruined by time and heat. On the back, ML, and a date that won't stop lining up with the wrong memories. Back under the chandeliers, Steve's question hangs between them like a verdict. "Please," he says, voice shredding around the edges, "come with me. Just a moment." Donald glances toward his manager, toward the bottle in his hand, toward the chain that has started to feel heavy. He doesn't move, yet. The compass swings once, twice, like a clock deciding whether to start. Tonight, one answer will crack open 25 years of smoke and silence. 3 nights earlier, before anyone in the ballroom had a reason to look twice at a waiter's chain, 2 locked histories were already drifting toward each other. The lounge off the main hall is built to hide people like tonight. Velvet chairs, dark wood, a piano that never quite speaks, only listens. From here, the gala is reduced to a pulse through the walls, laughter and silverware turning into ocean noise. Steve Leroy lowers himself onto the edge of a settee and clutches his cane like it's the only honest thing in the room. Donald hovers by the door, bottle still in his hand, the habit of duty fighting the instinct to run. "I shouldn't be back here," Donald says. "My manager." I'll speak with him. Steve's voice scrapes. Please, a minute. A minute sounds survivable. Donald steps closer, keeping a table between them, the way servers do when a guest has had one drink too many, or one memory too much. The compass rests against his shirt, warm from the lights outside. Steve's hand rises, hesitates in the air. May I? Donald doesn't answer. He doesn't have to. The old man's fingers, unsteady and careful, touch the pendant as if it could bruise. He turns it, the chain whispering, and finds the back by feel alone, like a pianist sliding to a familiar chord. Find your way home. The 4 words sit in tight engraving, neat as prayer. Steve breathes them, not as a discovery but as recognition. The color drains from his face, then floods back in patches. Oh! His throat closes. He tries again. Who gave you this? My mom, Donald says. She said it belonged to my father. The word still feels borrowed. That it was the one thing he wanted me to have. Steve's eyes lift. They're bright, and for the first time Donald sees the youth inside the old man, a sun-shaped light trying to break the surface. Your father, Steve says carefully. What was his name? Donald shakes his head. I never knew him. He died when I was little. The old Polaroid flashes behind his eyes, the awkward angle, the blurred smile, the initials on the back, hers. My mom said he was a good man who made bad enemies. She didn't like talking about it. Did she say where she got this? Steve presses the pendant against his palm. This exact one? She said it was his, Donald repeats. He doesn't add that sometimes she'd stare at it as if listening for something only the metal could tell her. Look, Mr. Leroy, are you accusing me of stealing? Because if this is about the scene out there, I'm not accusing you. The old man's voice breaks on you. I'm remembering. He releases the pendant and turns the cane's carved head under his thumb, the shape of a compass rose mirrored in walnut. Donald catches the echo, and the room tilts a degree. 25 years ago, Steve says, looking past the room, past Donald, I had 2 pieces made. One for me, one for my son. Metal from the keel of a ship my father sailed. Superstition, I suppose. A compass to keep our men from losing themselves. I engraved words on the back of his. Find your way home. He laughed at me, said home changes. I told him the compass wasn't for places, it was for people. The word son hangs like smoke. Donald swallows. His tongue feels too big in his mouth. And your son? Michael. A name like a door opening. He was... Steve stops. He puts the cane aside with 2 hands, as if lowering a coffin. When he looks up, he's already inside the memory. The night returns to him in colors. Orange first, then the unnatural blue of emergency lights. The Leroy estate was old wood and older pride. He had argued with his wife about the new wing, too much cedar, not enough steel. She laughed and told him to stop measuring everything. He remembers smoke slipping along the ceiling like thought, remembers shouting men in uniforms, remembers Michael on the porch steps, coughing, wild with determination, saying, Mom's inside. No, son, I'm going. He remembers grabbing his boy by the jacket, the heat through the fabric. He remembers letting go. He remembers too many details, and not enough of the right ones. He ran orders like a general, because business had taught him that control is the opposite of chaos. He barked at firefighters as if they were juniors at the firm. He signed papers with hands that didn't believe in shaking. Hours later, a man with a soft voice told him the house had collapsed on the south side, that they pulled what they could, that identification would be impossible. His wife's ring came out of the ash, blackened, but loyal. Michael's chain did not. Steve bought an urn, gathered what they gave him, and stood at the edge of a hole while men in suits said the correct phrases. He told himself, a father's job is to finish what a father starts. He closed the door on grief the way he closed deals, quickly, efficiently, as if speed could disinfect sorrow. Years passed. He asked questions. His partner, Howard Crane, took tasks he did not want. Insurance, lawyers, cremation. The company climbed. Steve grew quiet around the boy-shaped silence in his house. Crane prospered in the noise. By the time Steve realized silence is not closure, there was nothing left to open. The lounge returns around him. Donald has not moved. The bottle on the table throws a tired ruby oval onto the wood. You think this is his, Donald says low, nodding at the compass. That your son's, that this, he lets it hang. There have to be copies. The city is full of fakes. There are not. Steve's voice steadies with certainty that scares them both. There is one. I designed it. I watched the jeweler cut and solder. I paid with a check I still own the stub for. There is one. Donald's throat tightens. So what are you saying, Mr. Leroy? That my mom lied? That she stole it? She was a nurse. She worked nights. She didn't have time to steal anything. I'm not saying that. Steve closes his eyes. I'm saying I've been wrong for a very long time. A murmur swells outside as the pianist finally lets a chord slip. In here, the air holds still. Tell me about your mother, Steve asks. Donald doesn't want to. Not to this man. Not after being pointed at like contraband. But something in Steve, the wobbling dignity, the way he said, son, softens a small locked place in Donald's chest. Her name was Lorraine, he says. She had hands that could sew a wound and smack a roach without missing a beat. She kept this chain in a shoebox when I was a kid, then gave it to me when I turned 15. He touches the pendant with 2 fingers. Said it belonged where people could see it. Said it would help me find what I was looking for. What were you looking for? An answer that didn't change every time I asked it, Donald says, surprised by his own honesty. She died 3 years ago. Heart. Too fast. I'm sorry. Steve says it the way some people set down a glass. Carefully, aware of what can break. They sit with that. Mr. Leroy, Donald says after a beat, whatever you think this is, I need to get back. I'm already in trouble. Of course, Steve says quickly, rising too fast and catching himself on the cane. I would like to help you. Not as a... He searches for the right shape. Not as a patron. As a man who needs to know whether the world is about to make sense or fall apart again. Donald studies him. The old man's control is a coat he keeps trying to shrug back on. Under it, panic, and something warmer than panic. Look, Donald says, I can bring you the photo. The one my mom kept. It's old, ugly, maybe useless. But there's a guy in it, and on the back it says ML. If that means nothing to you, then we forget this. I'll give you the chain if you want it. It doesn't feel like it's mine tonight anyway. Steve flinches. Don't give it up. Not yet. He clears his throat. ML Quais are my son's initials. The words slide under Donald's skin like cold water. His first thought is that the old man is delusional. His second is that delusions don't usually come engraved the same way in two different cities. "I'll bring the photo," Donald hears himself say. "Tomorrow?" Steve asks too quickly. "After my shift." He glances toward the door. "If I still have one." "You will," Steve murmurs. "I'll make sure." "That's not always how it works," Donald says, but the edge in his voice is duller now. Steve nods. His hand hovers again, not quite touching Donald's shoulder. "Thank you." The words should feel like a transaction. They don't. They feel like a hinge. Donald grabs the bottle, checks the label to give his hands a task, and steps back into the doorway. The corridor blinks with light. The ballroom swells. Laughter reassembled, a horn of conversation pouring into the hall. He turns once. Steve is watching the compass, not as an owner, but as a pilgrim watching a star. There's pity in Donald he doesn't want to name. There's also a thin thread of curiosity winding itself through his ribs, pulling a direction from nowhere. He doesn't believe in fate. He believes in tips and rent and showing up on time. Yet, something about the way the old man said "one" refuses to let go. Donald re-enters the gala with his head down and his heart annoyingly awake. He moves between tables, resets his face to neutral, apologizes to his manager, and pretends the compass isn't dragging every step by a fraction. He tells himself the man is confused. He tells himself grief can make shapes in smoke. He tells himself this will pass in the morning. But when the piano starts a slow, familiar standard, and Steve Leroy does not return to his table, Donald touches the pendant and feels, beneath the metal, beneath the muscle, a certainty he can't yet name. Something in that man's grief is real, and it is walking toward him. Queens forgives the late shift. The trains grind soft as lullabies outside Donald's window. The radiator ticks its old metronome. He tosses his black vest on the chair, lets the bow tie pool in his palm, and stands a moment in the square of city lamplight, listening to a building breathe. Pipes, a neighbor's TV, someone arguing kindly in Spanish down the hall. The compass rests warm against his chest. He should sleep. Instead, he reaches for the shoebox. The cardboard is tired and heroic, the lid patched with blue painter's tape. Inside, high school programs, a church bulletin, a plastic bag that still smells faintly of lemons, and beneath it all, a felt pouch the color of bruised grapes. He loosens the string and slides out the small stack. Birth certificate copy, a wrinkled note in his mother's rushed hand. "Keep this close, Donnie. It belongs to you." And the thing he's avoided for years because it always looks back. The Polaroid sticks to the paper like it's determined not to be seen. He peels gently and lifts it into the lamplight. A woman. His mother holds a bundled baby the way people hold the only thing on earth that still answers to hope. She's laughing toward the lens. You can almost hear the sound. Beside her, a young man leans in, smile dragging one eyebrow higher than the other, as if the joke that made her laugh was his. Time has eaten the right half of his face, a bloom of brown and black where features should be. Heat warped, the glossy surface melted into a thumbprint of damage. Donald swallows. He's memorized the intact parts. Jawline, left eye, that half smile like a dare. The destroyed side still feels personal, like someone ripped the page out of his own face. He flips the picture over. Fading ink scrawls across the back. The downstrokes heavier, like the writer pressed hard to convince the future they meant it. Find your way home, ML. He stares until the letters ghost and return. ML. The lounge, the old man's hands. The way, 1, had sounded like a verdict. Everything slides back into the room. The initials are a tiny door, and something behind it is breathing. His phone lies where he dropped it, screen spidered at the corner. He scrolls to a number he hasn't used in months and presses call. It rings too long. Then, who's dying? The voice is sandpaper wrapped around honey. Hi, Mrs. Ellis. His mouth is suddenly dry. It's Donald. A beat. Donnie? Another beat, and the voice softens into recognition. Oh, child. Did I wake up or pass on? You only call me in emergencies. Sorry, it's late. I'm old. Late is when the good shows end and the pills kick in. What happened? He tells her. Not the chandelier and the cane, not the room that stopped breathing, just the chain, the man, the question that sounded like a memory remembering itself. She lets him talk. She always did. That picture, he says finally. The one from the pouch. You said once it came from the same box as the chain. Paper rustles on her end. He can see her in her easy chair. Stacks of crossword books like small cities on the table. Your mama gave me both when she started getting tired. Asked me to keep them safe, then asked me to give them back to you when you were old enough not to pawn them for concert tickets. I never pawned anything. I know. That's why you got them. A breath. There was a card, too, once. A business card. Fancy. With a lion on it? I used it as a bookmark and lost the book. Age steals the address and leaves the house. Donald closes his eyes. A lion. Mrs. Ellis. Did she ever say the man's name? He doesn't say, my father. The word keeps making promises it can't keep. She danced around it. Said he had people who didn't like his shadows. Said knowing his name would put a target on yours. I told her a boy needs a name like he needs a winter coat. She said this world puts holes in both. Silence. The kind that says the next words will matter. Do you think she was protecting him, Donald asks, or me? Honey, she says gently. It was the same thing. He turns the photo over again. The initials stare back, small and relentless. Keep it close, Mrs. Ellis says, and that chain. Don't let nobody buy your story with their money. He almost laughs. I can't afford to let anyone buy anything. You call me when daylight opens its eyes, she says. I'll make tea and we'll ask the Lord for patience and then we won't use it. He grins despite the wait. Deal. They say goodnight in the way people do when neither wants to set the phone down first. When the line goes quiet, the apartment leans back into its sounds. Donald props the photo against the lamp and studies the missing half of the young man's face. His own features echo somewhere in the left eye. He touches the compass, the metal cooler now, the engraving pressed like a brand into his skin. Find your way home. Where? He whispers to the empty room. Where's home? Across the river, the city sharpens to glass. Steve Leroy's study is a museum of decisions. Framed contracts, photographs that pretend to be candid, a model ship he bought instead of sailing. He has changed into a cardigan his late wife always hated, and listens to the metronome of his grandfather clock, insisting that time behaves. He pulls a drawer that sticks, as if reluctant to remember. Letters slide forward in careful stacks, his mother's woolly cursive, Michael's right-angled block script from prep school, and beneath them a leather folder with the jeweler's crest embossed in gold. He opens it to the drawings he made himself. Measurements, sketches, a compass rose at 3 sizes. The pendant's bail reinforced to carry history without snapping. He runs his finger along the arcs. His hand had been steadier then. His confidence was crueler. Another folder yields the receipt, the check copy, the date. He has kept these like superstitions. Now they feel like testimony. He closes his eyes and sees again the pendant in the waiter's palm, every flaw identical, every flourish true. "Find your way home," he says into the quiet, and the words echo back like a challenge. To which home, Stephen? The one you built with money, or the one you lost with it? He opens a different drawer, this one locked, and takes out a photograph of Michael at 19 on the stern of a boat, hair sacrificed to sea wind, grin wide enough to teach light how to behave. He presses his thumb to the picture. "Are you hiding in that boy's face?" he asks the air. "Or am I building a ghost with my need?" The clock insists. Tick, tock, proof of nothing. He doesn't sleep. At 4, he gives up and calls Clara Jensen. She answers on the second ring like efficiency chosen her. "Yes, Mr. Leroy." "I need you at the office early," he says. "We're looking for records. Adoption papers, around 2005. A child with the surname Crumb, first name Donald." The name feels both found and fragile in his mouth. "Discretion, Clara, and speed." "I understand." "Clara?" He almost tells her why. He almost says, "My grandson." He says instead, "Thank you." "Of course," she replies, and he can hear her already opening the day with a pen. Morning bleaches Queens into a softer version of itself. Donald showers, pulls on a hoodie that will not offend a librarian, and studies the compass in the mirror. He has decided to bring the photo to the old man. He doesn't know what he's hoping to prove, that the world is small, or that fate can't possibly read his name that clearly. On the subway, he sits with the Polaroid in an envelope, thumb tapping the paper as if it might answer. Straff hangers sway, headphones hiss. A baby laughs like it invented joy. He thinks about Mrs. Ellis and her lost lion. He thinks about names and targets, and how sometimes the only thing worth risking is the thing you're told not to touch. By the time he climbs the steps to street level, the sky has brightened enough to let the compass throw a single clean spark across his chest. Clara Jensen is already at a government building that smells like old toner and punctuality. She wears navy because it never argues and walks like a deadline with good posture. The clerk across the counter recognizes the kind of money that taught itself to be polite. "I'm looking for adoption records," she says smoothly, sliding a carefully folded authorization letter across. "Child, Donald, middle initial unknown, last name Crumb, year approximately 2005, birth mother Lorraine. We're prepared to pay for search and retrieval." The clerk clicks keys with the patience of a cat. Records like that are sealed. Of course. Clara keeps her smile professionally small. "Is there a process for lawful access if the subject is now an adult and consents?" "Usually a petition to unseal with a judge." More keys. The clerk frowns at the screen, then at Clara. "Some files have additional restrictions. Court order." "Additional?" Clara's pen stills. "Red flag overlay," the clerk says, not unkindly. "Means someone powerful wanted this buried." Clara inclines her head as if she expected that. "Thank you for your help." She steps outside into a slice of winter light and texts Steve. Records exist, sealed by court order, likely 2005. Need legal strategy. She hesitates, then adds, someone didn't want him found. Across town, Donald folds the envelope back into his hoodie pocket and quickens his pace toward Midtown, toward a study filled with proofs and ghosts. He doesn't know that a clerk just confirmed a secret his life has been orbiting. He doesn't know that an assistant is already prying at a lock with her bare professionalism. He only knows the way the compass keeps tugging, left at the light, past the coffee cart, under the scaffold that rings like chimes when buses pass. The city gives him a map he didn't ask for. The chain draws north. Two men in the same city, walking separate corridors toward the same door. One with a photograph curled at the edges. One with a sketch clean as gilt. The day opens like an archive. Truth rustles. Leroy Industries' legal floor is all glass and courtesy. Even the silence is expensive. Clara Jensen signs the visitor log with a stroke that wastes no ink and is met by a receptionist who belongs to the decor, flawless, unhurried. Archives? Please, Clara says and holds up her badge. General Counsel cleared it. Down a corridor, where the lights never flicker, a paralegal unlocks a room the color of caution. Boxes line the shelves in neutral tones, as if grief can be filed alphabetically. Clara pulls on thin gloves and starts with Leroy Estate 25 years ago. Crane. Howard Crane's name appears like a watermark. Letters on his letterhead. Emails printed and clipped. Consent forms signed with his efficient signature and that unflappable flourish. He handled everything after the fire. Immediate insurance notifications, the cremation directive, the contractor reviews, the estate inventory. There are memos addressed to Steve from Crane, polite, decisive, offering to shield you from distressing particulars and fast-track the necessary closures. Clara reads with a pencil behind her ear, making a constellation of check marks on a legal pad. In a folder labeled Insurance, she finds the first tear in the suit, a payout date stamped 4 days. After the fire, expedited under an exception usually reserved for natural disasters. There's a claim note, body identified by circumstance, household items and dental records presumed destroyed. The attending official's signature is unfamiliar. She keeps digging. In Keiko cremation and disposition, a faxed authorization remains irrecoverable for individual identification due to thermal event. The box marked DNA is stamped NA. Clara sits back. She's felt it in government offices before, the moment a system stops being a maze and reveals itself as a hallway someone built on purpose. She opens Financial Post-Fire. Wire transfers bloom across the pages like oil. 2 of them land in an account registered to Crane Consolidated Holdings. Dates 7 and Berman 9. Days after the fire. Memos, temporary liquidity, and intercompany advance. Amounts that would make a mayor blink. The paralegal peeks in. Need anything? A second pair of eyes, Clara says, and smiles to make it a joke. The paralegal laughs politely and withdraws. Clara photographs the essentials on the firm's scanner. The cremation authorization with NA, where DNA should be. The insurance exception. The after-fire transfers into Crane's pocket. She keeps her notes clean. Short verbs, exact numbers. She's building a bridge Steve can walk across without falling. On the top floor, Steve Leroy stares at a city that once seemed manageable. He presses a fingertip to the window and remembers the heat that took rows of cedar like matchsticks. He can taste the ash again. He thought age had dulled that particular flavor. It hasn't. Clara knocks. He turns, relief and dread tripping over each other on his face. What did you find? The tidy version? She hands him a thin folder, the bare minimum facts arranged to wound. Howard handled the cremation and insurance. The cremation was authorized without DNA. Insurance paid out in 4 days under an exception, and 2 large transfers left company accounts within a week of the fire and landed to here. She taps Crane Consolidated Holdings. Steve opens his mouth and nothing useful arrives. Without DNA, he repeats softly, as if testing whether the phrase will break his teeth. Who signed? She gives him the unfamiliar name. I don't know that man, Steve says. Mason would have... He stops. Get Mason. Mason Greer has been a lawyer long enough to dress his guilt in good tailoring. He sits in Steve's office with his hands folded so loosely they look empty. Tell me, Steve says. Mason studies his former client for a long 10 seconds, as if there might still be a version of this meeting where the past gets away clean. Howard took point after the fire, he says at last. You asked him to. I asked him to shield me from distress, Steve says, disgust and self-loathing finding the same chair. I didn't ask him to solve it with shortcuts. Mason's shoulders sag. You were not yourself. He said identifying the remains was cruel. He said there was risk to the company if images leaked. He said speed was sanity. A breath. He brought me the forms. I signed what he flagged. Without DNA, Steve says, each word its own blade. Mason meets his eyes. There was no body fit to test, Steve. That's what he told me. The remains were too damaged. Clara doesn't look away. And the transfers? Howard said interim cash flow. Mason murmurs. He often shuffled funds between entities. It wasn't unusual. Immediately after my house burned, Steve says. Mason lets the accusation land. He was persuasive, he says, voice low. And I was a coward. Steve closes the folder and places both hands on it like a minister at a funeral. Did you ever see my son's body? No. Did anyone you trust see it? Mason's jaw tightens. No. Then we buried air, Steve says, and for a moment his age shows with unkind accuracy. Thank you, Mason, for your honesty, late as it is. When Mason leaves, Clara waits. Steve's eyes have gone to the window again, but he isn't seeing the city now. He's seeing a boy stepping toward a door full of heat. We'll go through the courts for the adoption records, Clara says gently. The clerk flagged a court order. We'll petition to unseal. Steve nods as if hearing someone else choose. Do it. Queen's Answers knocks differently than Midtown. Doors open on chains. Eyes measure before words do. Donald's buzzer wakes the building. He checks the camera and sees 2 men in good suits and worse smiles. He cracks the door and keeps his shoulder in it. What's up? Mr. Crumb? The shorter one leads with teeth. We represent Mr. Stephen Leroy. A cream envelope appears, heavy enough to have opinions. A formal invitation, and a car, if you'd like, to take you to his residence at your convenience. Is this a subpoena? Donald asks, half joking, half not. A conversation, the taller one says, of mutual interest. Donald opens the envelope because suspense is more expensive than paper. Thick card, engraved letters. A time, a place. His name spelled right. The words, private meeting, and Pertuis, personal matter. He hears his own heartbeat. He hears Mrs. Ellis telling him not to sell his story. He hears his mother fussing at the chain, her hands trembling, saying, "It belongs where people can see it." "What does he want?" Donald asks. "Closure," the short one says smoothly. Donald almost laughs. "For who?" "Both of you," the tall one says. He sends his respect. Does he? Donald folds the card back in. Where was that respect when he... You know what? You're just the messengers. He inhales, checks the compass with his thumb. "I work tonight." "We can wait." "I wasn't asking," Donald says, surprising himself with the edge. "Tell him I'll think about it." The messengers trade a look that says they have been told exactly how stubborn grief can be. "We'll be downstairs," the short one says. "For an hour or two." Donald closes the door and leans his forehead against it. The apartment exhales with him. He takes the card to the table, sets it next to the Polaroid, and watches the two objects refuse to behave like strangers. He wants to shred the invitation and nail the pieces to the wall. He wants to go, too, if only to throw the chain on a rich man's desk and say, "Here. Have your past back." Why now? The question keeps flipping between anger and gravity. Why care after 25 years? Why care about a waiter with a chain? Because of the initials. Because of the way the old man said, "one," like a measurement and a prayer. Because sometimes you recognize family in the way someone holds their pain. Resentment and curiosity wrestle in his chest, and both insist they're doing it for his own good. He texts Mrs. Ellis. "He invited me to his house." She replies with the speed of someone who keeps her glasses on a string. "Wear clean socks. Don't go alone if your spirit says no." He stares at the compass. "What do you know?" he asks it. It does not answer. It only points everywhere at once. At sunset, Steve stands alone in the hallway where his family used to hang coats. He has walked the house like a penitent. Study, dining room, the spare bedroom he keeps as if a guest might return in the night. He stops before the gilded frame he loves and hates. Michael at 12. Cufflinks too big. Hair a losing fight. Pocket square, a victory. For years, Steve has spoken to the portrait the way guilty men speak to graves, confessing only what he can survive hearing out loud. Tonight, the words skitter and refuse to line up. Clara's folder is warm from his hand. DNA. Insurance. 4 days. Transfers. To Crane. He hears Mason's voice. There was no body, Steve, and feels the floor correct itself under him, not in comfort, but in terrible balance. "If he's truly yours," he says to the boy in the frame, "God forgive me for letting you burn." The Hudson wears dusk like dark silk when Donald steps into the Leroy foyer. Marble reigns in every sound. A butler who looks bred from quiet leads him down a hallway where the air remembers polish and old arguments. The study is wood and water, paneled walls, a wall of glass, the river moving like a thought no one can stop. Steve stands beside a ship model as if he's bracing against weather only he can feel. For a heartbeat, they just look at each other, a young man carrying a question, an old one carrying the consequence. "Mr. Crumb," Steve says, voice softer than in the lounge. "Donald." "Sir." Donald's hands stay in his jacket pockets so the compass won't decide to introduce them first. Clara Jensen hovers by the sideboard, crisp as a new page. On the desk waits a small case the size of a book you don't want visitors to see. "Thank you for coming," Steve says. "I won't waste your time. He stops, corrects himself. "We've arranged for a test. A simple buccal swab. Strict chain of custody. Results tomorrow." I know this is intrusive. I ask not because I doubt you, but because I have to stand in front of whatever truth exists without excuses. Donald's mouth finds a half-smile that isn't comfortable. "You want to see if I'm yours." "I want to see if I've been wrong longer than a man should live wrong," Steve says. "If I owe you something besides an apology." Silence gathers. The river ticks along the glass. "All right," Donald says, the words sounding like he signed for a package that might explode. "But if this turns into headlines, I'm out." "No headlines," Clara says quickly. "Documents stay in-house. Results are shared only with the two of you." The case opens. Sterile swabs, labeled envelopes, a form that believes in blanks. A medical technician, summoned from nowhere, like efficient magic, steps in, gentle and precise. Donald sits. The swab's scrape against his cheek is clinical, humiliating, oddly intimate. Steve offers his own mouth to another swab, like penance. When the kit seals with a click, the room breathes again. The technician leaves with the box like a messenger in old myths. "Thank you," Steve says, hands gripping the back of a chair until the leather complains. May I ask you to sit?" Donald does. His eyes drift to the wall of photos. Awards, very good suits, a boy in a sailboat throwing his arms wide to catch sun. He has the left eyebrow Donald knows from the Polaroid. "That's Michael," Steve says, following his gaze. 15. Thought wind was a kind of permission. Did he get it? For a while. A small smile, then a collapse. He was brilliant, not obedient. We argued our way through his 20s. He loved music I called noise, and people I called dangerous, and ideas I called soft. He also loved deeply, clumsily, the work my money could have done if I let it. Donald shifts. "What do you mean?" "He wanted the company to be less about extraction," Steve says, almost amused at his young son's audacity. "More about restoration. I was all profit. He said the numbers were starving something human in us. We fought, He rubs his temple. "I kept thinking time would sand our edges into inheritance. Then the house burned. The river keeps moving because it doesn't know how to stop." Steve takes a breath he has been saving for years. "There was a woman," he says, "a nurse, Lorraine Bennett. He spoke her name like he was touching cold water on a hot day." The sound leaves Donald before he can filter it. "Lorraine?" Steve's head turns sharply. "You know it." "It's my mother's name," Donald says, air thinning. "Lorraine Bennett." Everything in the study leans in, the ship, the portraits, the paneled walls. Steve swallows. He said she understood the parts of him I was too proud to see. I told him the board, the press, this city. None of them would forgive him for loving beyond our tidy lines. He told me he didn't need their forgiveness. I didn't answer the way a father should. Donald's heart is loud enough to be rude. The Polaroid opens in his mind, the half-smile, the burned blank, the initials. Somewhere in his chest, a door unlatches. "He used to leave for days," Steve continues. "I assumed it was rebellion, Now I hear myself and want to slap the man I was. Donald stares at the floor until it steadies. My mom used to disappear too, he says slowly, words stepping gingerly over fresh ground. Not for long, long enough that when she came back, she walked softer, like the world noticed her again. When I was small, I remember a man sometimes. Not a face, a sound. He closes his eyes. He whistled off key. Steve laughs. A short, shocked sound that turns wet at the edges. Michael whistled like the kettle forgot its key. The river blurs. A memory presses against Donald's eyelids, sudden and complete, like a slide thrown onto a wall. Flashback. A cramped apartment that smelled like burnt coffee and medicine. Lorraine in scrubs, hair pinned, moving with tired grace. A man in the next room, voice low. A rasp where a laugh should be. He turned his face away from windows. He wore long sleeves even in July. He held baby Donald and tapped the compass against the tiny chest, saying, "This is ours." It points to people, not places. When he kissed the baby's head, it was on the left, because the right side of his mouth didn't meet the same way. Donald sees a glove, a scar disappearing under a cuff. His mother's fingers smoothing a line of worry that had lived on the man's brow so long it left an address there. Then, another memory, like a blade. Sirens. Not fire this time. Metal and street. Lorraine sobbing into a phone. A nurse friend holding her up in a hospital corridor. A doctor choosing clean words. Accident. Instant. Donald is 5, and the world forgets how to balance. After that, Lorraine moves the shoebox to a higher shelf. She buys a new lock. When Donald opens his eyes, he's back in the study, both of them older than they were a minute ago. He was alive after the fire, Steve says, voice hoarse with awe and horror. Hiding, hurt. And I... The sentence can't carry its weight. Donald should be angry. The anger is there, faithful as a dog. But under it something else is sprouting. Recognition, grief, a weird relief that the person in the Polaroid was not imagination. Steve gestures to the river like he needs help from something larger. I should have torn the city apart, he says. Instead, I accepted closure because my partner made it easy. I cleaned my hands with paperwork. I called it strength. Donald's fingers close around the compass until it prints its teeth into his palm. My mom said men with money like to call their fear strategy. He hears the heat in his tone and softens. She also said love will make a person hide if the world intends to hurt what they love. She was right, Steve whispers. They sit with the river. Somewhere down the hall, a clock contributes its theory of time. The knock comes like a dropped coin. Clara opens the door a few inches, face a study in neutrality. The messenger from the lab stands behind her with a sealed envelope like a minor myth. Already? Steve says, startled by the mercy of speed. The lab prioritized, Clara replies, per your arrangement. No one reaches for the paper. Finally, Donald does. He tears the edge carefully, as if the result has bones. He scans the lines he doesn't want to pretend to understand and finds the one sentence written for laymen and television. Probability of relationship, grandparent-grandchild. 99. The room rises, then steadies. He hands the paper to Steve. The old man reads. His face collapses and reforms into someone gentler than money ever made him. My God, Steve says. He sits as if a string was cut. The paper shakes in his hand, then falls onto the desk, skidding until the word Probability stares up at both of them like a correction. He looks at Donald not like a witness, not like a problem to solve, but like a miracle he is ashamed to meet so late. His mouth opens. Nothing proper arrives. Then, finally, something simple enough to hold. "You're my grandson." He doesn't stand. He doesn't perform. He just bows his head and cries, quietly, terribly, one hand on the desk, the other lifted a few inches as if hoping the air will be enough to hold. Donald freezes in the doorway of his own life. Something in him wants to run. Something else wants to let a tired man rest his forehead against a shoulder. He does neither. He takes one step closer and doesn't take the next. The river keeps moving. The ship model glints. The compass is heavy and newly light at the same time. A word without a clean history waits between them. Family. Morning breaks with headlines that taste like scandal. New York Herald. Billionaire Steve Leroy reopens 25-year family tragedy. Daily Ledger. Waiter or heir? Mystery man at center of Leroy legacy bombshell. Every camera seems aimed at the mansion gates. Reporters huddle under umbrellas like vultures with press passes. By noon, from waiter to heir trends online. Hashtags spinning faster than the truth they orbit. Inside, the house feels smaller than it did yesterday. Steve sits in his study, the same one where the words, "You're my grandson," cracked his life open. The DNA report lies face down on the desk. He's already memorized every number. Across from him, Clara reads from a folder fat with new documents. "Crane moved more than money," she says. "He moved people. I've cross-checked his personal accounts with the adoption registry and—" She exhales. "It's him. He arranged the placement for Lorraine Bennett's child in 2005 under the alias Donald Crumb. Payment was routed through an intermediary nonprofit he funded. That same nonprofit handled multiple private adoptions, most of them connected to families in his investment network." Steve's hands tremble. "So he didn't just steal my company. He erased my bloodline." "He made sure no one could connect you and the boy," Clara says quietly. "The adoption was sealed by court order he obtained himself. No DNA ever tied Michael to the remains. Crane falsified every piece of proof you grieved over." The words slide through Steve like ice. "And Lorraine? She vanished from hospital records 3 months after the adoption. My guess, she found out what he'd done. He likely paid her to disappear, or made it impossible for her to fight back." Steve stares at the window, the Hudson crawling beneath gray sky. "He told me he cremated my son to spare me the sight." He laughs once, short and raw. "And I believed him, because guilt is easier than suspicion." In a cramped newsroom across the city, reporters devour leaked copies of corporate audits. Leroy Industries is suddenly a bonfire of intrigue. Forged insurance claims, hidden accounts, shell donations to Crane's own foundation. An investigative reporter reads a single line aloud, slow and savoring it. Howard Crane authorized transfer of $8.3 million to personal holding. March 1999. Notation. Post-fire recovery. By afternoon, the Manhattan District Attorney's Office reopens the case file. Crane's charity offices are raided. His estate attorney hauled in for questioning. On every screen, Steve's face flickers. Older now, yes, but still that unmistakable composure of the city's former financial saint. The networks replay his last public appearance, him and Donald at the DNA lab, flashes like gunfire, Donald's uneasy smile. In one studio, a news anchor says, "The once untouchable Howard Crane, posthumously implicated in one of the largest corporate cover-ups in New York history. And now, the heir his greed tried to erase has returned." Donald changes the channel. Then the next. It's all the same. His name crawling under every face, like a headline he never asked for. From server to successor. Lost Leroy bloodline found. The waiter with the golden chain. He turns off the TV and throws his phone onto the couch. The chain feels heavier around his neck. A knock. He doesn't move. It comes again, this time gentler. "Donald?" Steve's voice, muffled but unmistakable. Donald opens the door halfway. "You shouldn't be here. The street's crawling with paparazzi." "I needed to see you." Steve's tone carries apology like a scent. "They won't stop until I tell them the truth. The whole of it." "Truth?" Donald laughs bitterly. "That your partner faked your son's death and sold me a new name? That's your world's truth. Documents, signatures, money moving like blood. For me, it was a mother dying broke in a walk-up, while you toasted your shareholders." Steve doesn't argue. "You're right." Donald blinks. "That easy?" "It's not easy," Steve says. "It's just true. I buried the truth with my pride, because facing it meant I had to be human again, and I didn't know how." Donald looks away, jaw tight. "You weren't there when we needed you." "I wasn't there when anyone needed me," Steve admits. "Crane offered me control when I'd lost everything. I let him build my guilt into a company. He turned it into gold, and I called it healing." Donald exhales through his teeth, shoulders loosening but eyes still sharp. "So now what? You fix your legacy? Give me stock options and a press release?" Steve shakes his head. "I want to burn it clean. Crane's foundation, his endowments, all built on what he stole. I'm going to dismantle it publicly, not to prove innocence, to confess complicity." Donald studies him. The old man's face has softened around the eyes, less steel, more bone. He almost feels sorry for him, and that makes him angrier. "Then do it," Donald says, "but don't do it for me. I'm not the headline you think I am." "You're not a headline at all," Steve says. "You're what's left of my son." Donald's throat tightens. "And you're what's left of his mistakes." Steve nods, taking the blow with gratitude. Both can still matter. The following evening, New York's elite gather at the Crane Foundation's annual gala, now crawling with press. Steve steps onto the stage before the board can stop him. Cameras flash like lightning. He grips the podium. "This foundation bears a thief's name," he says, voice steady, amplified through chandeliers. "Howard Crane was my business partner, my friend, and he betrayed everything we claimed to build. But worse, he betrayed the dead. My son, my family, my own bloodline." Gasps. Phones rise. He continues, softer now. "I was complicit in that betrayal, because I let comfort disguise itself as closure. I let a man convince me that speed was mercy. There was no mercy. There was theft. There was a child hidden in plain sight. There was a woman who died, carrying the secret I didn't deserve." He looks straight at the cameras. "I will not let this company or this name profit from silence any longer." The crowd ripples with whispers, scandal, awe. The press descends before the applause can form. Donald watches from the edge of the room. The reporters spin around, cameras finding him. The waiter turned air. A few shout questions. One flashes so bright it paints spots in his vision. He walks out. Later, in the car back to Queens, Donald stares at the skyline reflected in the window. It looks like a city built on glass and amnesia. Steve sits beside him in the dark, tired but lighter, like a man who has finally stopped pretending gravity is optional. "You can still walk away," Steve says quietly. "You owe me nothing." "I know." Donald watches the buildings blur. "But if I walk away now, I'll never know what he took from us. Or why." Steve turns to him. "Then we'll find out together." Donald almost smiles. "That's not a word I've heard much." Together. Outside, the city glitters, an empire built on firelight and paper trails. Somewhere in its noise, the last ghost of Howard Crane begins to fade. The sun hangs low over Manhattan, a slow coin dropping behind the skyline. On the rooftop of the Grand Meridian, the air smells faintly of wine, time, and the kind of evening that knows it's earned its peace. Donald Crumb moves between tables with quiet authority now. No tray, no bow tie strangling his neck. His jacket bears the insignia of head sommelier, the embroidered gold letters catching the last of the light. His movements are the same as before, smooth, unhurried. But there's a difference in the posture, in the way people look up when he passes. Not as if he's serving them, but as if he belongs here. He stops beside a couple debating between vintages and smiles with practiced ease. "For balance with the duck," he says, "I'd suggest the 2014 Margot. Soft tannins, but still enough backbone to stand up to the sauce." The woman nods, impressed. The man just says, "Perfect," as though trusting the confidence in Donald's tone more than the label itself. When he pours, his hands are steady. The bottle breathes, the glass sings, and, for a moment, the entire world is rhythm. Pour, pause, nod. Across the room, near the terrace rail where the city unfurls like a living map, an older man watches. Steve Leroy, a cane propped by his chair, wrapped in a charcoal coat that hides how frail he's grown. His silver hair catches the last gold of the day. His eyes soft but bright. He comes here every Thursday. Always the same table. Always the same view. The Hudson, reflecting the sun as it slides home. Donald approaches, 2 glasses in hand. "You're early," he says. "I wanted to see the sunset sober," Steve answers, smiling. "Doctors keep reminding me not to mix wine with pills, so I pick which one feels more medicinal." Donald laughs, setting the glasses down. "I'll make sure it's a small pour." They toast without fanfare. The clink is gentle, almost reverent. "Do you remember?" Steve says after a sip. "The first time we stood in this hotel together?" "How could I forget?" Donald smiles faintly. "You pointed a stick at me." Steve chuckles, the sound rough and full of affection. "And you thought I'd lost my mind." "I was pretty sure you had," Donald admits. "I still tell that story to the new hires when they think rich people can't surprise them." They fall into easy silence, the kind that doesn't need filling. Beneath them, the city hums. Above, a breeze slides between glass towers and carries the smell of the river. "So," Steve says finally, "tell me about this foundation board meeting you're avoiding." Donald rolls his eyes. "It's not avoidance, it's pacing. I'm not built for speeches." "You're built for truth," Steve says. "That's rarer." Donald looks at him then, really looks. The old man's shoulders are smaller, the tremor in his hand more pronounced. But his eyes, still, are oceans. For the first time, Donald realizes how much of his father sits behind them. "Have you ever thought," Donald says quietly, "how strange it is that something as small as this," he touches the compass pendant resting under his collar, "could drag 2 lives across 25 years of silence?" "Not strange," Steve says, voice soft. "Fitting. A compass doesn't move mountains, it just points true." Donald smiles, the kind that sits behind his ribs. "You've been saving that line, haven't you?" "Maybe," Steve grins. "But it's a good one." They share another sip, another quiet. Around them, the world slows down, not for grief this time, but gratitude. Steve's eyes wander to the edge of the terrace. "I thought I'd die still paying for my pride," he says, "but somehow you let me leave something better behind." Donald shakes his head. "You did that yourself." "No," Steve says, almost stubborn. "You showed me what home actually is, and it isn't marble or money or company shares. It's this. It's being seen and forgiven in the same breath." Donald doesn't trust his voice enough to answer, so he reaches into his pocket instead. A small square box slides out, black velvet, tied with a ribbon the color of old gold. "What's this?" Steve asks, surprised. "An overdue return," Donald says. "Open it." Steve fumbles slightly with the ribbon, then lifts the lid. Inside, nestled in dark fabric, lies a gold compass pendant, smaller, refined, the same design but modern, lighter. On the back, engraved in tiny script, "You found your way home." Steve's breath stutters. For a moment, he doesn't speak. His thumb traces the engraving as if it might disappear. "I wanted you to have it," Donald says quietly. "The old one's still mine, and his. But this one's for you." Steve looks up, eyes shimmering. "You had this made?" "Yeah." Donald shrugs. "I know it's sentimental, but—" Steve shakes his head, smiling through tears. "No, it's perfect." He turns the pendant in his hand, watching the dying light slip through the metal. The chain glints like sunlight on still water. After a long pause, Steve whispers, "No, you brought me home." Donald's throat tightens. He reaches across the table and lays his hand over Steve's. The old man squeezes back, his fingers paper-thin but sure. They sit like that as the sun dips fully behind the skyline, the city trading gold for indigo. "You know," Steve says after a while, voice faint but content, "I used to think time was cruel, that it stole without asking. But it gives back too, doesn't it? Just not what we expect." Donald smiles. "Maybe it just waits until we're ready to listen." Steve nods. "Then I'm finally listening." Below them, the city's lights flicker on, one by one, like confessions turning to hope. A soft wind sweeps the terrace, ruffling the napkins, tugging at the gold pendant now hanging against Steve's chest. It glimmers once, twice, catching the sunset's last breath before fading into twilight. Donald watches the river, his reflection merging with Steve's in the glass. 2 faces, different centuries of the same story. The waiter arrives to refill their glasses but pauses, sensing the quiet moment. Donald waves him off with a smile. "I think we're good," he says. The world shrinks to the table, to the glow of the lantern, to the faint metallic gleam that binds past and present. Steve leans back, content. If I don't wake up tomorrow, I'll still die a lucky man, he murmurs. Donald squeezes his hand again. You'll wake up. I'm not done annoying you yet. Steve laughs, the sound thin but alive. That's my grandson, he says, and closes his eyes briefly, smiling. The city hums. The night wraps around them. 2 generations, one bloodline healed. The compass pendants, one old, one new, catch the same slant of starlight. Between them, an invisible thread hums, bright and unbroken. And as Manhattan exhales into darkness, the river keeps its silent promise, always finding its way home. The chandeliers of the Grand Meridian drip light like melting stars. The same marble floors, the same mirrored walls. But tonight, the ghosts are seated too, unseen, polite, waiting for closure. It's been 6 months since the truth detonated. 6 months since boardrooms turned to courtrooms, since the city learned how greed could burn a family alive. Now, invitations gleam in gold foil. The Leroy Foundation for Restoration and Truth, a night of reconciliation. Donald told himself he wouldn't come. He said it over and over, like prayer or punishment. Yet here he is, straightening his tie in the reflection of a silver tray, the same place he once served champagne. Only now, his name is on the guest list. Across the room, cameras orbit like metal insects. The city's elite glide between tables, murmuring about philanthropy as if it were perfume. And in the center, under the soft white spotlight, stands Steve Leroy, thinner, slower, cane trembling slightly in his grip. His tuxedo hangs on him like memory, elegant but heavy. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Clara whispers at his shoulder. "I've lived long enough with silence," he says. "Tonight, I'll trade it for truth." He walks to the podium. The murmurs settle into something near reverence or morbid curiosity. His voice, when it comes, is steady enough to sound like prayer. "Good evening. When this hotel hosted my last gala, I spoke about legacy, about building a future from the ashes of the past. I used those words like armor, because the truth was too heavy to wear." A pause. He scans the crowd, men and women who have toasted him for decades, who called him visionary, survivor, saint. They look back now with pity and hunger for drama. "I spent half my life chasing profit," he says quietly, "and the other half grieving what greed stole." The room doesn't move, or not even the glasses dare to clink. "For years, I believed my son died in that fire. I buried the ashes of lies, not people. And while I built this empire of forgiveness for others, I never learned how to forgive myself." He steadies himself with both hands on the podium. The cane rattles once, then falls silent. "But life," he continues, voice trembling, "has an unkind way of giving us second chances through the children of those we failed." That chain around his neck. He looks up, eyes wet, searching the crowd. "That boy." The room tilts toward where Donald stands, frozen near the exit doors. Every head turns. Steve's gaze locks on him, unflinching. That boy is proof that forgiveness still exists. A heartbeat. Then another. Cameras explode into light. Donald feels the flashbulbs sting his eyes. The hum of 1,000 people inhaling at once. His pulse thunders against the compass pendant. His inheritance, his history, his question. Steve's voice cracks. "Donald, come here." Donald doesn't move. His instinct is flight. But then he sees something raw in the old man's posture. Not pride, not command. Just a plea, a shaking hand extended across a lifetime. He takes one step, then another. The crowd parts like a confession. Each echo of his shoes feels louder than applause. When he reaches the stage, Steve's breath catches. The microphones pick it up, amplify it into a sound halfway between sob and surrender. "You're my grandson," he whispers, and the world hears it. For a heartbeat, Donald doesn't breathe. He feels everyone watching, judging, remembering his name from the tabloids. The waiter with the chain. The hidden heir. He should resent this, being turned into a symbol instead of a man. But when Steve's arms open, trembling, hesitant, he steps into them anyway. The embrace is clumsy, desperate, decades late. Steve's cane clatters to the floor, and for once he doesn't reach to pick it up. He holds the boy like the world is ending and beginning in the same breath. His shoulders shake, and he murmurs into Donald's ear, words for only the two of them. "I'm sorry, Michael. I'm sorry, Lorraine. I'm sorry, Donald." Donald's throat burns. He doesn't realize he's crying until his chest heaves. The cameras catch it all. The billionaire's tears soaking the collar of a young man's suit, the gold chain glinting between them like a bridge finally finished. A woman in the front row begins to cry. Then another. Then the sound spreads, an audible tremor through crystal and velvet. For the first time in his long, carefully curated life, Steve Leroy doesn't care about being seen. He pulls back just enough to look at Donald, to trace the features that once belonged to his son. "You've given me something I thought I'd buried with him," he says, voice breaking. "A reason to keep breathing." Donald swallows. His voice comes low. "You found me. That's enough." Steve shakes his head, tears streaking. "No," he says. "You found me." The crowd can't help it. They stand, clapping, some weeping, some filming through tears. The chandeliers vibrate with applause. From the back, Clara wipes her eyes discreetly. Somewhere among the press flashes, the sound of forgiveness finally outweighs the gossip. Reporters will write about the spectacle. A family reborn. Fortune meets forgiveness. But none of them will capture the simple truth in Steve's voice as he turns back to the microphone, Donald standing beside him now, hand steady on the old man's shoulder. "This foundation is not for legacy," Steve says. "It's for restitution. For every child buried in bureaucracy. For every name rewritten by money. For every truth delayed by pride. Tonight, we start over, not as benefactors, but as family." The applause swells again, louder this time. Donald doesn't hear the words so much as feel them. His chest is a storm, of grief, of relief, of something cleaner than either. The compass pendant presses warm against his skin, catching the light like it approves. Steve turns toward him, whispers, "Your father would be proud." Donald's reply is quiet, but sure. "He taught me to find my way home." For once, the cameras are kind. They capture not scandal, not spectacle, but two men, one holding the other's arm, as if the act itself might keep the world from falling apart again. Outside, the city glitters indifferently, but inside, under the chandelier glow, the story finds its heartbeat. Wealth bowing to humanity, pride kneeling before love, And for the first time in 25 years, the name Leroy means something that isn't broken.